At Ritual, we know what goes into the holiday season: the potluck planning, the gift giving, the spreadsheets. So this new year, take a moment for yourself with science backed support that puts you first. So, whether you're focusing on supporting foundational health with a clean vegan multivitamin or supporting your gut health with Symbiotic Plus, do it with 30% off your first month at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Hey there, Ritual here to give a big shout out to you for making it through the hectic holiday season. The magic of those family moments, that was you. And now there's new milestones to prep for in 2025. This new year, check clean, quality pregnancy nutrient support off your to-do list with Ritual. We've done the research to create science-backed pregnancy support like our prenatal multivitamin, natal choline, and fertility support, all designed to be taken alongside each other. But don't just take our word for it. They're also third-party tested for microbes and heavy metals and Clean Label Project certified. So whether you're trying, thinking about trying, or already there, we don't have to tell you that prioritizing yourself can be the hardest part. That's why we're helping you get started today with 30% off a 3-month supply for a limited time at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Find the podcast online at bookedonrock.com and on all the major podcasting platforms: YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Apple, Amazon, iHeart, and more. Be sure to subscribe and give a 5-star review if you like the podcast. Greg Prato making his return to the Booked on Rock podcast. His latest book is Bang Your Head, Feel the Noize, the Quiet Riot Story. Comprised of quotes from interviews past and present and featuring many rare vintage photos, Greg examines all eras of the band, their 70s period, which featured guitar legend Randy Rhoads in their lineup, through the blockbuster metal health period of the early 80s, and all the way to the modern-day version of the group. A playlist of Quiet Riot can be found in the show notes. Greg, welcome back.
Eric, hello. How are you?
It's good to have you back again.
Now, I was going to say, have I set a record for most appearances by a single gentleman on the show, or not quite yet?
You and Martin Popoff, neck and neck. But I think you might. I have to add up. I have to tally up the totals. But this is probably maybe fifth, sixth, maybe even
fifth or sixth, something like that.
Yep. Yeah. Last time we had you on was for the Zeppelin book.
Yes.
What'd you think? Did you see the movie, the documentary yet?
I have not seen it yet, but I'm friends with people who've seen it, and it's so far very positive feedback I've heard.
Yep. Saw myself, really good. It focuses on the beginning part right up through when they're making Zeppelin 2. Okay. And then it ends there. So really good. So here we're talking about Quiet Riot, and this book includes quotes from interviews, both past and present. Who will fans hear from in this book?
Well, I was lucky to have interviewed numerous times over the years Rudy Sarzo, who we all know is the longtime bass player of Quiet Riot, and also the late, great Frankie Banali, the drummer of Quiet Riot. I interviewed several times. Funny enough, for my book called Bonzo that came out a few years back, where I interviewed 30 standout rock drummers, and they all talked about John Bonham and what he meant to them, and also his influence, what made him probably the greatest rock drummer of all time. So I interviewed him a bunch of times. So I had those two interviews. I covered a wide variety of topics with both of them over the years. So I was able to use a lot of those quotes in this book. But as far as original interviews, I interviewed Kelly Garney, who was the original Quiet Riot bassist, who played on the 2 albums in the 70s with the great Randy Rhoads on guitar. And I also interviewed a gentleman named Greg Leon, who people may know from the Greg Leon Invasion from the 80s. He was a member of the band Dubrow, which after Randy Rhoads left Quiet Riot to join Ozzy, Quiet Riot then was known as Dubrow, obviously after Kevin Dubrow, for like 1 or 2 years. So Greg Leon was the guitarist in Dubrow before leaving to join Dokken and then launching the Greg Leon Invasion. And I also interviewed Richard Christie, who we all know from the Howard Stern Show. And he's a huge Frankie Banali fan and also Quiet Riot fan. So he had some very interesting things to say. As well as Ron Keel, singer from Keel. He was very close friends with Kevin Dubrow. And Keel, which I didn't even know this, opened for Quiet Riot on the QR3 tour. So that was pretty good to hear. Stephen Piercy, I spoke to from Rat. He had some interesting things to say. Bumblefoot had some. Bumblefoot, what's funny enough, you would think that he is just a Randy Rhoads guy, but he praised Carlos Cavazo. He hit the nail right on the head. When you think of Quiet Riot, the only Quiet Riot that we're ever going to really know the material of and that instantly pops in your mind is the Carlos Cavazo Quiet Riot, not the Randy Rhoads Quiet Riot. If you think about, like, he came up with the Metal Health Bang Your Head riff, which to me is one of the greatest metal riffs of all time. I think that's a great, great riff. And his solos are my favorite type of solo. We probably discussed this on one of my past appearances. I love when guitarists play solos that you could sing the melody to, whether it's Brian May, Ace Frehley, David Gilmour, of course, the great Eddie Van Halen. And yeah, Carlos Cavazo, the Metal Health album is chock full of great guitar leads and riffs and everything. So, oh, and also Don Jameson I interviewed,
That's right. Yep.
of course from That Metal Show.
Yep.
So yeah, so I may be not thinking of one or two people, but that right there are that's the meat of the interviews, you could say.
You cover all eras. I discovered the band, I think, like you did. I was around 11 when Metal Health came out. Come On, Feel the Noise was huge. Yeah. Come On, Feel the Noise was big. Metal Health, the album was big. And they were number one, the first ever heavy metal album to hit number one on Billboard, which was huge and still is to this day. That's just a great landmark moment for metal, not just for the band. Yes. But by the end of the decade, they're forgotten. Let's start with the beginning, which goes all the way back to the early to mid 70s, which I didn't realize. How does Quiet Riot form? And also, can you talk about the differing stories regarding how Kevin DuBrow got the gig? Because he says it was instant chemistry, but the original bassist, Kelly Garney, says it wasn't that instant.
Right. What happened was Kelly Garney and Randy Rhoads lived very close to each other. I think maybe like 1 block away from each other. They first met in school, became very good friends, and then they both realized they like rock music. So Randy, of course, had a background in music because his mother owned a music school called Musonia. So Kelly picked up the bass. They both began playing together and also started playing in bands in the Los Angeles area. Then Kelly talks about in the book that he just happened to overhear a phone conversation, a mutual acquaintance talking about a singer she knew, and it turned out to be Kevin. So he got the phone number, called Kevin, they arranged a tryout, and they met together. Kelly says it was at Kevin's house, and they were not impressed with what they saw or heard, but they still exchanged numbers, and supposedly Kevin convinced Randy to give him another try. They met up again, and then one thing led to another, and although they still weren't that impressed with him, I guess they were impressed with his drive to be a singer and to take everything seriously. So they stuck with him, and they were pretty honest with him, saying, look, you have to find your own voice, because Kevin DuBrow's favorite singers were Steve Marriott from the band Humble Pie. He also loved early Queen, which I didn't know until doing interviews for the book, that he was a big Freddie Mercury fan. And he also liked Rod Stewart from the Faces era. And also Kelly says, to Kevin's credit, he did get better as a singer. He was able to find his own style, his own singing approach, which is true. If you listen to Kevin DuBrow, of course, he's not technically as brilliant as, say, Rob Halford or Ronnie James Dio, but you hear 5 seconds of Kevin DuBrow and you know exactly who it is. And that to me is like my personal favorite. Those are some of my favorite singers, like Paul Stanley, Alice Cooper, Joey Ramone, David Lee Roth, of course. You hear just a little bit of their singing and you know who it is. That was Kelly's side. Oh yeah, something else I forgot to say. I was able to get access to a lot of classic interviews from Kerrang! Magazine, Circus, and also Hit Parader. So I was able to get a lot of quotes from the past. So I have Kevin speaking throughout the whole book, Carlos Cavazo, Randy Rhoads. So even people I couldn't speak to, they're featured throughout the book, and it's also them telling the story. But Kevin's side of the story was that they got together and actually jammed, I believe in a garage or something like that. It may have been at Randy's house. I forget exactly.
I thought it was at Kevin's house, maybe.
Maybe it was at Kevin's house.
And Kevin's mom was there, answered the door.
Yes. But Kelly says that they made it a point to never actually jam when they met someone, just in case if they were a wacko or they didn't hit it off, they could have just gotten the hell out of there, which actually makes sense. Yeah, so that's Kelly's side, but Kevin claims that there was music involved. So,
and of course, eventually, he wins them over. He's in the band. So we have Kevin DuBrow on lead vocals, Randy Rhoads lead guitar, Kelly Garney on bass, Drew Forsythe on drums. So Kelly said that Randy's family didn't like Kevin at all. They tolerated Kelly, but they weren't big fans of him either. It appears from reading quotes from Kelly in the book that really it was over Randy's public image. Randy wasn't partying hard with the rest of the band, but Kevin would say otherwise. I also wonder if it's that they blamed Kevin for maybe turning their son onto drugs and alcohol. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think it was that. Kelly claims that when they first met Kevin, he was not doing drugs and was not drinking. That happened later. And something that I learned that I didn't know after Randy tragically passed away in 1982, as we all know from the plane crash. When you would read interviews or articles about Randy, he was painted in a very angelic kind of state. You know, he was a teetotaler. He only practiced guitar. You know, he didn't party and everything like that. But when I interviewed Kelly for the book, he said, no, that's not an accurate, thing. I mean, granted, he wasn't like a drug addict or anything like that. But just like most other people his age in the late 70s, early 80s, he had a good time and partied. There's nothing wrong with that,
Who would blame him? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But was
exactly.
it maybe that the mom just didn't? I was still trying to figure out where she came from on that.
It's hard to say because what I mentioned in the book too. I mean, so maybe that is true, but then by the other side of the coin, there's photos that are available on the internet of Randy Rhoads' funeral, and the pallbearers are Rudy Sarzo, Tommy Aldridge, Ozzy Osbourne, and also Kevin DuBrow. So obviously the family, at some point maybe made peace with him, or at least they could realize that he was an important person in, Randy's life or something. I guess you can make up your own mind with that as well.
You talked to people who saw Quiet Riot perform in those early days. One quote is from future Quiet Riot guitarist Greg Leon, who saw Quiet Riot open for Van Halen.
Yes.
Those two were the biggest bands on the Sunset Strip. Van Halen signs the major record deal with Warner Brothers in 77, but Quiet Riot got passed over for the knack. Their first two albums released in Japan only. From what I gather from reading the book, they weren't so good, and it wasn't.
They aren't very
particularly
good. No.
Yeah, it wasn't Randy's fault necessarily.
No, it was just pretty much. It was a case of a young band doing what the record label or producer or manager is telling them to do. When I interviewed Kelly, he talked about how the thing with Van Halen, he thinks that no one ever told Van Halen, like, you have, David Lee Roth, start wearing spandex or start wearing buttless chaps.
Yeah.
Or,
which I'm
Eddie,
wearing right now, by the way.
Yeah,
for this interview. Get myself
right.
into it.
And like no one was like, oh, Eddie, start, tapping, or
Right.
start painting your guitar with stripes. Everything was just done organically with Van Halen. And I can see his point, because I think if Quiet Riot, the thing is, Quiet Riot with Metal Health, to me, my theory is that's a band doing what they wanted to do, what their heart was telling them to do. It's also a very focused sound. The songwriting is much, much better. Kevin is a much better singer at that point. So my theory is, I think that Kevin used those two. I mean, of course, he didn't know this at the time, but he used those two albums as kind of like a building block and also like a learning curve. And to his credit, he did not repeat that same mistake or mistakes with Metal Health. He totally fine-tuned everything. He knew what he was after. He knew what it took at that point to hit it big. And of course, it paid off with that Metal Health album.
How about in Circus Magazine? You mentioned in the book that in 1983, Quiet Riot, I think they won the best new band of the year. People thought they were new. They thought they were brand new. They didn't even know they had two albums before that.
Exactly. And then what's funny is that I think they were best new band, and then they were also number one. I think they were number two comeback of the year. So it's totally mixed signals there that they're saying a new band, but then they also comeback of the year.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
Right, that's it. I'm going to be right outside those doors. The next time I have to come in here, I'm cracking skulls.
Big shout out to you for making it through the hectic holiday season. This new year, get clean, quality, pregnancy nutrient support off your to-do list, including Ritual's best-selling Essential Prenatal Multivitamin, designed with 12 traceable key ingredients to support a healthy pregnancy. With big changes coming up, take the small steps now and start today with 30% off a 3-month supply at ritual.com/podcast. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
There were tensions within the band, especially around that second album. There's a crazy story involving a fight between Randy and Kelly over Kevin. They're not happy with Kevin, how he sounds, how he looks.
Right.
Give us the story as to what was going on during that period in 78. Things got pretty ugly.
Yeah, well, the band was very frustrated that they were putting out albums that were only released in Japan, and then they were also being told that they were going to be able to at least play in Japan, where they had supposedly a pretty good following. So they're being told, like, yeah, pack your bags. Next week, you're going to open up for Cheap Trick, or just whatever they're telling them. And it just never came to pass. They never went over there, but yet they're being told that they're being written about in the music magazines. They have a following. They're getting fan mail from Japan. So I think frustration led into it, and then also, of course, drinking. And then I believe at that point, Kevin and Kelly didn't really see eye to eye and weren't really getting along. I guess when you mix drugs, frustration, and alcohol and a gun,
Yeah.
things aren't going to happen. Things aren't going to wind up very good at the end.
The
So yeah,
argument
so
over Kevin, I'm trying to remember though, was it that who was blaming who for it? Because they both weren't happy with him?
yeah, I think what it was Kelly wanted Kevin out of the band, and then I can't really recall exactly what the exact fight was about, but it was that Randy, I think, went to Kelly's house. There was a confrontation where they actually fought, and before they fought, Kelly just pulled out a gun. He didn't point it at Randy, but he just shot like a warning shot at the ceiling. And usually, if someone ever did that to me, I'd run the hell out of the house very quickly.
Yes.
But Randy actually charged him, and they got into a fight. The gun wasn't used after that, but yeah. Then after that, they split, and Kelly then claims he was very drunk. He got in his car because he wanted to confront Kevin, who was at a recording studio, but he luckily got pulled over by cops and was arrested for DWI. So that confrontation between him and Kevin never took place. And then the happy end to the story is many years later, Kelly and Kevin became very good friends when they were both living in Las Vegas. Kelly would even house at Kevin's house, and they became friends. So
This is the kind of stuff in the book that you get, and I knew nothing about this as far as Quiet Riot.
honestly,
So
I didn't know that. I'm going to be honest. I knew. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I was a huge Quiet Riot fan in 1983. I think most teenage or soon-to-be teenage kids were at that point. As the albums go on, by like the late 80s, I totally lost interest, which is funny enough. It seems like that happened with everybody because
sure.
every album of Quiet Riot sold less and less and less. But going back and doing research for this book, like each album has at least a few good songs, at least the ones with Kevin DuBrow. There's an album which we may talk about that had Paul Shortino, which I'm just not a fan of at all. There's an album, like for instance, in the 90s, I never heard of I never heard the music, called Terrified, I believe it's called. And it
Right.
came out in 93. So that would have been like, at that point, I had nothing to do with Quiet Riot. Like I was all about Soundgarden and Faith No More and Blind Melon and all those bands. So, but going back and listening to it now, it's a very inspired, good album. And like I hear that album now, and all I could think of, if that album came out as the follow-up to Metal Health, their popularity wouldn't have dipped as much, because we'll probably get to it later. The Condition Critical album was not a good album. It just does not compare well to Metal Health at all.
You're right. I put together the playlist for this episode. That gave me an opportunity to listen to these songs. Which one is that with Stay With Me Tonight and The Joker?
Yes, that is the QR album. That is with Paul Shortino.
Okay, so that's not the one you were just referring to. That would have been, is that the one that has Angry and the cover of Highway to Hell?
The one that I'm referring to is not even on Spotify.
Okay, I noticed there were some that weren't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was only able to track it down on YouTube. It's called Terrified. It came out in 1993. And then the albums after that, again, it's like album by album, it gets not as good, not as good. Then the last album released in Kevin's lifetime was an album called Rehab, which again is them finding their focus, and it's a very, very strong album. So the three best Quiet Riot albums by far: Metal Health, Terrified, Rehab. Those are my top three picks.
There's a story out there that there was this Randy Rhoads versus Edward Van Halen
Yes.
battle back in those days. So let's talk
Yes.
about that. Kelly told you a
Sure.
story about how Randy taught guitar and he would learn Van Halen licks for sessions. But
Yeah.
beyond that, the consensus is that he wasn't interested in copying Ed in the studio or on the stage. He had his
Right.
own thing.
Well,
Ed had his own thing as well.
You know what I'm gonna do? Let me actually ask you a question. There was a famous, about 2 or 3 years ago, there was the famous YouTube clip of Eddie Van Halen talking candidly about Randy Rhoads. And Eddie, of course, he's speaking not knowing that this clip was ever going to be released publicly. He just thinks he's speaking to the interviewer. on a phone, and the interviewer just going to take quotes to put in a magazine article. But he's saying how he was not, it didn't sound like he was that impressed with Randy Rhoads and that he thought he was just kind of like Randy was ripping him off. I'll be honest, I don't hear any Eddie Van Halen in Randy Rhoads. The only thing I hear is the live Randy Rhoads solo on the tribute album where he does a little bit of two-hand tapping. That's the only comparison. Although Eddie Van Halen's probably one of my favorite guitarists of all time, to the best of my knowledge, he never touched upon classical music on guitar, right? Or I mean,
No, I mean there were influences in there a little bit, but not
but I mean,
like Randy.
But I mean, didn't pursue it as much as Randy Rhoads, right?
Correct. You're correct
okay.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, what I'm getting at is in the book, there's people. Well, there's a story how Eddie Van Halen would just, he just thought that pretty much Randy Rhoads was like copying him, which I just don't see that.
I
But
don't see
that,
it either. I don't see
yeah,
Edward had in the early going there when he was a kid, he was being taught classical, but
yes,
he left that behind
piano,
him.
right?
But there was elements of it in his style a little bit. But here's something interesting. Kevin Dubrow, I was fortunate enough to interview him. It was a phone interview when he came through Connecticut, and we had him on the radio station that I was at to promote a show. I think they were touring with Poison, and
Okay.
it was like a package tour. And I remember asking him, what do you think Randy would have done if he lived? And he said, I think he would have done a classical album. Like he was pretty convinced that that was the case because he said Randy would talk about it a lot. That was his thing. I think there's a story that Randy was at a show to check out Van Halen and
I was going to say there's a story in my book actually
Okay,
told by
yeah.
Kelly that talks about Randy going to meet Eddie and goes backstage, which I'm not going to tell a story because someone has to buy this book, right?
right. People need
This
to
book here,
get the
right?
word. There it is. That's the cover. Quiet Riot 1 and 2 came out in 78. It's not until 1983 do we get the next album, but that's the breakthrough, Mental Health.
Yes.
So a lot happens between 78 and 83. Let's start with the departure of Randy Rhoads. It starts with Randy auditioning for Ozzy. He's got a new solo band. Randy's mother, Dolores, told a great story back in 82 about it, which you include in the book. Randy didn't think much of it, but Dolores encouraged him to go to the audition.
That is correct. That Randy, even during his life, when he would be interviewed, he was pretty honest, saying that he was never, although he respected Black Sabbath, he was never that big a fan of Black Sabbath. Randy was more into Uriah Heep. He liked Mountain. Leslie West was a very big influence. I learned from speaking to Kelly. I didn't know that he was a big Led Zeppelin fan. Randy was. In fact, when they first met Kevin, he said they were looking more for like a Robert Plant type singer. And that's what kind of turned them off at first with Kevin, because Kevin was more of a shouter, kind of like some of the other singers I mentioned earlier, such as Steve Marriott. So that's something that I learned from doing the interviews.
And then he gets the gig. I think he got it right away, too. Like Ozzy instantly was like, yeah, this is our guy.
Yep.
And Kevin Dubrow said Randy would have been a fool to pass it up.
Mhm.
But he cried for a week when Randy told him he was leaving Quiet Riot. He was bummed. How do we end up with the lineup on Mental Health? So we have Kevin Dubrow on lead vocals, Carlos Cavazo on lead, Rudy Sarzo as well. He's in now, and Frankie Banali on drums. If you could just kind of put together the pieces there as to how that lineup comes together.
Well, after Quiet Riot splits up, or at least they stop using the Quiet Riot name in late 79, they become Dubrow in 1980. There's several members that passed through that, such as Greg Leon, who I mentioned before, who I interviewed for the book. In early 81, Randy invites Rudy to leave Dubrow to join Ozzy's band. And something that has to be said about Kevin, I know if I was trying to make it in music and I had a Randy Rhoads and also Rudy Sarzo in my band, I would do anything to keep them in my band. But to Kevin's credit, he seemed to take it very well. He totally understood why Randy left to join Ozzy, because he's an established rock star with a record label contract and everything. And then again, about a year later, Randy calls Rudy, who was staying even at Kevin's house at that point, to see if he'd be interested in joining Ozzy. And Rudy's first reaction was no, he didn't want to, because he was playing with the band Angel at the time. And I think also playing with Dubrow. I think he was doing two bands at the time. And he hangs, it was actually, it was either, I forget if it was Sharon or Ozzy that called the first time. But he says he's not interested, hangs up the phone, and Kevin was like, what the fuck is the matter with you? He's like, that was a golden opportunity, so Luckily, the next day, either Ozzy or Sharon called back again, and he said, "All right, yeah, I'll come down and try out." And then he got the gig. What happens is in '81, Frankie Banali joins. I believe they're still DeBro at that point. He was in a band called Monarch. That was a band in LA. And supposedly Randy Rhoads recommended him. Randy Rhoads was a fan of Frankie's drumming. So he signs on with Kevin. Then Carlos Cavazzo was in a band called Snow at the time that would play shows with Quiet Riot or also DeBro. Again, the story goes that Randy recommended him to Kevin, saying, "There's this guy, Carlos, I hear nothing but good things about him. You should try him out." And he did, and that worked out. Then they have a bassist named Chuck Wright, who would be in the band long enough to play on two songs on Metal Health, which just so happens to be Metal Health, the title track, which is one of their best known tunes, and one or two other tunes. I believe also a song called Don't Want to Let You Go, which is also a great track.
Yeah, that's a good song. Yeah.
Very, very good song.
And a cool bass line on that title track, Metal
Yep.
Health.
Yeah, but what happens is after Randy passes away in early '82, Rudy stays with Ozzy for a few months, but he said that the joy of music just kind of left because it was obviously a very traumatic, horrible thing that happened to him. And what happens is Frankie or Kevin call him and say, "Look, we're working on these demos for an album. We may have, I don't know if they were signed at that point to Pasha Records or maybe they were in talks. They're doing demos or recording. Would you like to maybe just play on one or two tracks?" So he says, "Sure." He comes and plays, and he says as soon as he fell back in with them, his joy of music had returned because now he's back with his friends, and they could all bond together because they were all very close with Randy, and they were all probably still grieving together. So then he decides, which is very ballsy of Rudy Sarzo, to leave Ozzy, who at that point is one of the top metal acts in all of the world, touring arenas and everything. He leaves Ozzy to rejoin Quiet Riot, and that's how the Metal Health lineup became.
Greg Prato's latest book is Bang Your Head, Feel the Noise, The Quiet Riot Story. It's out now. So you lead chapter 9. It's titled Bang Your Head. By the way, that's your wife did the layout of the cover?
She did. She did.
I saw the name in there.
She always comes through. Mary Prato, I give a very big thumbs up. She's very talented when it comes to designing book covers.
That's right. So you lead chapter 9 titled Bang Your Head with, quote, "There's a famous saying, from darkness comes light. And in the history of Quiet Riot, perhaps this phrase was never more fitting than what followed immediately after the tragic death of Randy Rhoads. At some point around the time of Rhoads' passing, the Dubrow Band finally found someone with a major label connection who was willing to take a gamble on them. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Spencer Proffer. He's really important to the Quiet Riot story. Who is Spencer Proffer? How does he play a role in the story of Quiet Riot in terms of getting them signed and influencing them to record the song that would become their breakthrough hit, Come On, Feel the Noise?"
Well, he is a gentleman that became involved with music, I believe, in the '60s, and he became friends with Clive Davis, who, of course, we all know from Columbia CBS Records. He actually produced a Tina Turner album from 1976 in which Tina Turner covers rock songs. I believe she covered Whole Lotta Love on the album. What happens is Spencer Proffer, this is according to him, hears on the radio one day Slade's version of Come On, Feel the Noise. And he's blown away by it because he remembers seeing Slade in the early '70s, I believe, in England. And that song was a huge hit in England. It was a #1 hit, whereas in America, it was virtually unheard of. So his thing is, if I could just find a young and hungry band to do a good cover of Come On, Feel the Noise, I think we could probably have a hit. Because if you remember, in '82, that's when metal was really becoming popular again with MTV, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Def Leppard, all these great bands. He hears of this band playing, DeBro, doesn't know much about them. He goes to see them, and he says he goes and there's maybe 10 people in the audience, but he's blown away by them. He met them afterwards. He explained who he was, and he also at that point was granted his own record, not only his own record label through CBS called Pasha Records, he also had his own recording studio. So there's a whole Pasha recording studio, a record label. So it was pretty much an offer that Quiet Riot couldn't, well, at that point, DeBro couldn't refuse. He said, "Look, if you just cover this song, Come On, Feel the Noise, I'll also do a demo of all your original material and we'll shop it around and try to get a deal going." So that's what happens. They do it. Of course, there's the famous story that Kevin did not want to cover that song. In fact, he instructed his band members to blow it and just do a bad job so that it would suck and they wouldn't have to do it. But somehow lightning struck, and Frankie Banali, when I interviewed him for Song Facts, he told me this story, and I included it in the book, that he doesn't know what it was. He just started playing it, and the beat, that beat, if you listen to the original Come On Feel the Noise by Slade, the beginning sounds nothing like the Quiet Riot version. Quiet Riot trimmed away a lot of the fat of the original version. In fact, it's very controversial, but I'll put it out there. I actually prefer the Quiet Riot version over the Slade version.
I was just about to say the same thing.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe because
Yeah.
I'm American, I'm sure if I was British, maybe I would think differently.
It's got more
Actually,
muscle to it. It's, it's the production is really cool.
yeah, and
Benally's
also,
drums.
and also it starts right away with the classic drum beat in the chorus, whereas the original, there's a whole intro, and it's not till like a ways into the song that you get to the chorus, which is now a great classic chorus. So
Remember Slade's Run Away here in the States?
yes.
That was
Well,
that
yeah,
was
well,
really
what
their
happened
only
was-
hit here in the States.
Yes,
Slade.
well, they had two. They had Run Away, and also a song called My Oh My.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Yes, how could that's off the
Because-
same album?
Right, yes.
Watch Your Power Supply.
Yes.
Or what was it?
Yeah. Yeah, because what happened was because of Come On Feel the Noise becoming a hit, suddenly everyone's like, oh, up next, Quiet Riot with covering Slade with Come On Feel the Noise.
Yeah. Keep your
Slade
hands
is being
off my
mentioned.
power supply. That
Right.
was the album. Yes.
So Slade is being mentioned so much that then they suddenly become popular in America with that album with those two hit songs. But then, similar to Quiet Riot, Slade just fades away into obscurity right away.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
Short pause. Hold your breath for the dynamic duo.
The album's opening track, that's a classic, and that's the title track. And I guess I should just clarify, because I say title track, it's known as Bang Your Head, right? So it's Metal Health in parentheses, Bang Your Head.
This is the thing. And I had the opportunity to ask Frankie Banali this, and he actually cleared it. On the album, on the back of Metal Health, it just says Metal Health for the song title. The video, I believe, says Metal Health, then Bang Your Head. The single says Bang Your Head, then Metal Health. So I asked Frankie Banali, I'm like, what the hell is the right, title? Which is the correct one? He said, Bang Your Head, Metal Health. That's the right one.
And there's the one song from Randy Rhoads from his days on the album, that's Slick Black Cadillac, which is a great song. And then there's the tribute track to Randy titled Thunderbird. Many assume that was written after Randy passed. That's not the case, right?
Not the case. No, because on YouTube, there's a bootleg live recording of a Dubrow show from 1980, I believe at the Starwood. That's when Greg Leon was in the band. And they do Thunderbird. On the Metal Health version, they dedicate the song to Randy. And they, I think, added a new verse, which I think maybe talks a little bit about Randy. But supposedly the song was written after Randy left. If you listen to the song, the lyrics, it's about like a friend leaving. But not because they're dead, just because like similar to Randy Rhoads was leaving Quiet Riot to join Ozzy. So if you listen to the lyrics, it reflects that more. But then, of course, at that last verse, then it kind of changes the whole meaning a bit.
Don't Want to Let You Go is a good song. We mentioned that. It was released
Great
as a
song.
single. It didn't do that well, which is surprising. Did they make a video for that?
I was going to say, this is the thing. There were only two singles released from that album, Come On Feel the Noise, and also the song Metal Health. It was right around the time that Michael Jackson Thriller seemed to kick open the door, or at least convince people that you could have more than two singles and videos from an album. Then you get to, say, Def Leppard Hysteria, and you have, like 5 or 6 singles and videos. So Quiet Riot sadly fell victim to that with Metal Health, because there were at least 2 other songs that easily could have been singles and videos that I think would have been hits.
Which ones?
Slick Black Cadillac, and also Don't Want to Let You Go, which maybe it's one of my favorite Quiet Riot songs of all time.
Right.
Yeah, it's it's a great song, very poppy, but it's like power pop, but very good. Highly recommend that song.
Reminds me of on Stay Hungry, Twisted Sister.
The Price?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
One last note on Metal Health, the album. Cover image. This was inspired by Iron Maiden and also an old horror film.
Yes, The Man Behind the Iron Mask, which I have a quote from Kevin who talks about, he's like, oh, the old Vincent Price movie, The Man in the Iron Mask. And I did some research. Vincent Price was not in that movie.
No.
But we all make mistakes.
We get the point, though. Yeah, it's an old horror film, so that's what inspired it.
Yes.
And
But it actually came in handy because if you think about it, in the 80s, every band had to have some kind of mascot or some kind of cool cover image. You had, of course, Eddie with Iron Maiden. Then you
right.
had all these other, you had Vic Rattlehead with Megadeth.
Yeah.
And the cover image of Metal Health is pretty cool. I mean, speaking to Greg Prato, who was 12 turning into 13 in 1983, 84, that really hit home with me.
Yeah, man, it's an iconic. I'm sure many a 12-year-old had that poster,
Yes.
if there was one. But
I had a
I don't know.
t-shirt with a similar
T-shirt.
image to that,
Yeah,
yeah, which
yeah,
I
yeah,
talk about in the book. Yes.
yeah. So Quiet Riot blows up with Metal Health. They are huge. They played the US Festival, which Kevin DuBrow later said was a huge turning point.
Yes.
380,000 people. MTV comes along, perfect time. The videos, like you mentioned, two of them, they're huge. Rudy Sarzo shared some great stories with you about filming those videos, including where
Yes.
the padded
What,
cell
I
and
was going to say, let me just jump in really quick because I know
Yep.
you're a big Van Halen fan.
Okay.
Rudy Sarzo tells a good story that they're coming into the US Festival because Quiet Riot, they were on tour, so they got in, maybe like went to a hotel, then played, then got right out. They didn't see Van Halen, they didn't see any other bands. But anyway, Quiet Riot is getting ready to leave from the hotel to go to the US Festival to play. Who should be walking in the hotel from a night of partying but Van Halen?
Ah,
There you go.
I love it. And they partied hard for that show. Dave was hammered for
I remember I interviewed Pete Angelus for the book MTV Ruled the World
Yeah.
about that, and he talks about how he was concerned that he was concerned for David Lee Roth that he may have partied too hard and was not going to be able to pull it off. But to Dave's credit, he did pull it off.
He did. Pete Angelus, by the way, I don't know if he's originally from Connecticut, but he went to high school in Connecticut. I read that online.
He is one of the most, I got to tell you, one of the most fascinating behind the scenes guys. I interviewed him for the MTV Ruled the World book, and he told great story after great story. I even told him at the time, this is like 10 or 15 years ago, you should really do a book. And he was like, yeah, maybe. But then we kind of lost track. And then,
It would be
but yeah,
outstanding. He went on to manage the Black Crows.
the Black Crows. And he was also part of the fabulous Picasso brothers.
Yes,
who was
him and
part-
Dave.
Some of the greatest music videos of all time, whether you like David Lee Roth solo or not, you have to go with Yankee Rose, Going Crazy. And though I'm not a big Crazy from the Heat fan, you can't deny the videos. California Girls, Dressed as Gigolo were great. And Hot for Teacher is one of the greatest videos of all time. And he's totally all over that video.
Yeah, they put those videos together. They put their minds together, the Picasso
Yes.
brothers, and he's the guy. Forget about it, Dave.
Yeah, exactly.
Forget about it, Dave. Yeah, I
Exactly.
think they had a falling out though, so
They
I don't
did.
know.
They
But
did.
yeah, the
They did have a
book,
falling out, would you
maybe
say.
that's what's preventing him from
How many
wanting
people
to
had a
do the book.
falling out, by the way, with
Dave?
with the David Lee Roth?
Yeah, Dave.
One guy who never had a falling out with David Lee Roth, Gary Sharon.
Gary Sharon.
I always like bringing up Gary Sharon at least once during my my
Sharon.
appearances because of that abomination, Van Halen 3.
Van Halen 3, I know. We were talking about him at the US Festival, and then I started mentioning the videos. Oh, that's where I was heading. The padded cell
Yes.
in the video or videos. Maybe it was in both. I can't recall.
One video, I believe.
Oh, okay.
The,
What,
just the mental health video.
Rudy said there was somewhere where that ended up.
Yes, it was a place called Joe's Garage, which is where Frank Zappa rehearsed. It somehow wound up in Frank Zappa's rehearsal space.
How the hell does it end up there?
I guess maybe just to deaden the sound or like muffle it. Maybe I don't know how the hell it winds up there.
Yeah. The end of chapter 11 reads, perhaps the best summary was provided by manager Warren Entner, which also proved to be quite prophetic concerning what happened next in Quiet Riot's career. Quote, it felt like we were on a meteor that had a quick burn. And it was a quick burn. You pinpoint the date of March 31st, 1984 is when we see the downfall of Quiet Riot. Kevin DuBrow's quotes to Circus would burn quite a few bridges, right?
Absolutely. Which I talk about this in the book, which is kind of laughable when you think of what's going on now with the internet and tweeting and social media, how every single day it's like people are trying to outdo each other with bad mouthing each other and calling each other bad names and what they should be doing differently and all this other, and people glorifying themselves and things like that. What Kevin DuBrow was doing was he felt, which is understandable, he was struggling for so long, and Quiet Riot has this massive success. What happens then, of course, after one band hits big, record labels then try to sign 50 million Quiet Riots, which some, did kind of just follow the Quiet Riot formula. But Kevin went like totally hog wild with just bad mouthing pretty much every band you could think of, even to the point I think he was even bad mouthing like Ozzy and was bad mouthing Motley Crue. And Motley Crue was very rapidly ascending to the point, love him or hate him, by 85, 86, they're probably the biggest metal band in all of the United States of America. So, yeah, he was giving interview after interview with Circus Magazine and also Hit Prater. Those were the two I really remember reading at the time. That he was just, going on, just saying. There's a classic quote I think I have in the book where he says something about those bands. At least he could fart on key or something like that,
Right.
unlike some of those other bands or something like that. Which I'm always a big fan of some fart humor, but
Sure. Yeah,
maybe
he
I
was
wouldn't
just
say that for
burning
Circus
bridges.
Magazine.
Yeah, he was burning bridges left and right.
Yeah. He did pretty, which, looking back with the interviews, he told that he was pretty much into cocaine and drinking a lot at that point and partying. So he probably wasn't the most clear-headed at that point, to make rational decisions.
So they followed up with 84's Condition Critical. Had another
Yes.
Slade cover, Mama
Yes,
We're All
which is
Crazy
a
Now.
pretty bad move if you ask me, but
It did okay, number 51 on the chart.
it was actually, I talk about in the book, it was a very good cover, though. It's not like you hear it and you're like, it was actually excellent, but just you're really kind of typecasting yourself and digging yourself into you're kind of digging yourself into like a ditch by just covering the same band over and over again, which, again, looking back now from the vantage point of 2025, the majority, it seems like, of pop artists and rock artists have a lot of outside writers and stuff. So covering other people's material and stuff isn't that unheard of. Whereas maybe in 1984, you expected, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley to be writing the Kiss songs at that point. But then, funny enough, Kiss then does start having a lot of outside writers. But like Van Halen was pretty much in-house for many, many years as far as the songwriting went.
That follow-up, they had to prove themselves with an original. And I think people started to feel like,
yeah, I mean,
didn't
the
have-
thing too, I actually had the opportunity to ask Frankie Banali this, and it's in the book where he talked. I said, looking back, is there anything that you think could have been done differently with Condition Critical, like maybe taking a breather? And he said, yeah, but the thing is, the record label was calling the shots because remember, Spencer Proffer is the producer. He is pretty much the head of their label, so he's telling them what should and shouldn't be done. And Pasha is part of CBS, which is like one of the biggest labels of the world. So instead of doing the wise thing, which is like, all right, guys, you know what? Take the rest of 1984 off, write, play maybe a few shows, test out the material. We'll come back in late 84, early 85 and do a really good album. They're like, no, come right off the road in early 84 and go right in the studio. And that's a recipe for pretty much disaster. I mean, yes, you've had Led Zeppelin 2, which is a sophomore effort. You've had Nevermind, which is a sophomore effort. You have Paranoid, Van Halen 2. There are certain instances where going right in and not having a lot of time to think about what your next move is paid off, but it definitely did not pay off with Condition Critical.
Bad Boy, Sign of the Times, Winners Take All, and Party All Night were also on that album, but didn't do anything. Mama
No.
We're All Crazy Now got the biggest result, and that was, I think I said, number 51 on the charts. The album,
Yeah, it
number
didn't even go
15.
top 40, the single, and the album peaked at only number 15 or 16, I believe, compared to a number one of Metal Health. And Metal Health, I think at last count, was 4 or 5 times platinum compared to Condition Critical, which went gold and platinum very quickly because every metal band that was played on MTV at that point went gold or platinum, and then it just fell off.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
This is heavy. There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
A few more albums released in the 80s. 1986 is QR3, which reached number 31, and in 1988 was the album QR, which peaked at 119. And this didn't feature Kevin Dubrow.
That was the one with Paul Shortino on
Paul
vocals.
Shortino, yeah.
But yeah, I was going to say there was another great song, although the album QR3 wasn't particularly good, pretty much about as so-so as Condition Critical. There's one fantastic song on that called The Wild and the Young.
Yes,
which
I'm with you.
my thing is, I think it sounds very similar to the style and production of Def Leppard's Hysteria, and that came out a year before Def Leppard's Hysteria, that song.
It really is a great song. I remember seeing the video
Yes,
and then it came and went.
came
But
and went.
again, putting together the playlist, listening back to it, it's like this is a great song. It's just
It is.
at that point people were moving on from Quiet Riot.
Yeah, and just the rest of the album wasn't good. So you have one great song and the rest of so-so stuff. It's not going to really go
Yep.
very far.
Shortino as the lead vocalist did not work. Let's talk about Kevin's firing. He
Yes.
heard the news before he was fired.
Yeah, so what happens is Rudy Sarzo leaves the band after the Condition Critical tour because he's not getting along with Kevin. Kevin was pretty honest in interviews saying he was really bad off at that point with sex, drugs, and rock and roll, embracing that whole entire lifestyle. And he and Rudy, who were once close, just hated each other at that point. And Rudy leaves, eventually turns up in, of course, Whitesnake. So they soldier on, they do QR3. Chuck Wright comes back in the band. He played on a couple songs of Metal Health. They do QR3. It's played a little bit on MTV. Doesn't do that well. Ron Keel, who I interviewed, talks about opening shows for Quiet Riot, and they're playing to like a half-empty arena. So that shows that people are not going to see them. Although Ron says to his eyes, they seem to be getting along and they were putting on decent shows, but just the audience wasn't there anymore. And things must have been going on behind the scenes because, yeah, they wound up. Kevin heard that there were rumors that he may be fired and they were in Japan. And he says, well, look, I'm quitting now then. And they're like, no, just finish the tour. You're not being fired. Let's finish this and we'll talk about it. They do the Japanese dates, and the last date I think was a week later in Hawaii. And he says he woke up to the plane ticket underneath his door, and he was left high and dry. All his other band left, and in early '87 they had one last meeting to just say you're fired to make it official, and then he left the band.
So then he rejoined them in the 90s. They did well with the resurgence of interest in 80s metal, I remember in the 90s, but he died of an overdose.
Yeah, but not as, the thing that's such a shame is 80s metal and like things like Spotify, which then makes it like now a lot of people are like, oh yeah, I love, let me listen to a Motley Crue song followed by a Nirvana song followed by a James Brown song. Whereas back in the early 90s, all of hair metal was awful. You only listened to like, it wasn't like as lenient or genre jumping. I think really the reappreciation of hair metal, I think, was really kind of in the late 2000s, early 2010s, because then that's when suddenly you see a lot of these songs pop up in movies, like The Wrestler had the song Metal Health Bang Your Head in it. And also Cobra Kai has a bunch of hair metal, 80s metal songs. And, now it's kind of just looked at as like fun, carefree party music.
When did those 80s package stores start? I think it was late 90s.
I think late 90s, but it didn't like I'm thinking of when the first Rocklahoma, which you could really pinpoint, that's when I think it really came back. That when I interviewed Richard Christie for the book, he saw Quiet Riot that summer at that show and was blown away. And then sadly in November, just a few months later, was when Kevin died.
Yeah, and that came as a surprise, I think, or I guess that's the question. Did that come as a surprise to his friends and bandmates? He died November of 2007, overdose.
Yes. It came as a surprise to me, but I was like, I was a fan, because like something I talk about in the book is I remember, like I said, I kind of, as they went on with album by album, I kind of just like lost interest. But around 2000-ish, and I'm at the height of like loving, like, for instance, Radiohead. I remember going to Tower Records and buying a replacement Metal Health CD because I suddenly had the urge to listen to that again. And and it's one of those albums that's like a guilty pleasure that, I really did like it.
Booked on Rock Podcast. We'll be back after this.
There will be an intermission.
Speaking of guilty pleasure, you mentioned that was the album that the band had out when I did interview Kevin Dubrow, Guilty Pleasures.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that one, from what I remember, is not one of their better ones. But, the thing is, listening back, there's always one or two songs that are decent.
Yeah, there was one on there that was definitely, and he even talked about it, they were making it with the intent of it being like a sports arena type of song. And I think is it Rock the House, maybe?
Okay.
It could be. I have the CD somewhere, and it wasn't all that good.
Yeah. Now I was
Wasn't
going
all
to
of them.
ask. So did you ever? So you had the opportunity to actually meet Kevin and also do a face-to-face interview
Just
or?
phone. And I remember he was really nice.
Hmm.
And I remember he was really interested in when the interview was going to run.
Okay.
When is this going to run? You going to run? I'm like, oh no, we'll run it tonight. Oh, okay. All right. What time? What time is it
Uh,
going to be? I said, oh, probably around like 7 p.m.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
he
because
was really
one
nice.
thing.
And I got the feeling that he really loved Randy Rhoads.
Yeah, he did. One thing I'll give Kevin credit with for doing research for this book, I went back and watched a lot of performances of Quiet Riot throughout all the years. And whether they're playing, it didn't matter if they were playing the US Festival or playing a little tiny bar. He always really put on a good show. He sang well. And he always seemed very appreciative that he had, whether it was again playing Rocklahoma to thousands of people or just playing a bar down the street. He was always appreciative that like, hey, at least I have this career that I can, go and play these shows and people still show up and people like the songs.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Especially
which is
after
sad.
how bad things got for him. I mean, it reached rock bottom. I remember they had the behind the music on them, and they talked about them playing in the middle of nowhere, like in a field. Was something they were playing somewhere where there were
Yeah,
cows?
they wound up playing a thing called nude stock, which
Yes,
is
that's
yeah,
right.
which you would think that like Quiet Riot's manager would say like, hey guys, why don't we maybe like aim a little higher than say like, nude stock? Like
Nude stock.
let's see what, like Rad is doing or what Cinderella is doing. Let's see if we maybe do like a package tour. Like maybe let's do something like that, not just play some, some show with like naked people.
And then they went on after Kevin passed. Mark Huff became the vocalist. The second blow comes with the death of Frankie Manali,
Yes.
2020 from pancreatic cancer. Now today we have Rudy Sarzo on bass,
Yes, we
right?
do. He
He's
came
okay.
back.
Alex Grassi on guitars, Jizzy Pearl on lead vocals. Jizzy Pearl was in Rat at one point, wasn't he?
He was Rat, Love, Hate. He may have sang in Warrant too, if I'm not mistaken.
All right, I think I saw Rat with Jizzy Pearl singing.
Okay.
That was on the tour with Cinderella maybe 15 years ago.
No.
And John Kelly on drums. So this is not a surprise to you that the band continues, knowing what Frankie told you in an interview in 2019. Can you share what his response was when you asked him about how he'd like to see the Quiet Riot legacy live on?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the exact quote, but I do remember that he wanted the band to keep going. And then interesting, I pulled up a archival quote from Kevin several years before he passed, and he even said that I want to see this band continue, even if I think his quote was, even if there's no original members, or I want Quiet Riot just to keep going on. So it seemed like him, Kevin, and Frankie both were on the same page with that. So you can't really criticize them for continuing on. And to Quiet Riot's credit, they're still playing pretty decent shows. Like I checked out where they're playing. A very popular thing now is for a lot of these more like veteran rock bands are to play casinos. But you see the venues, they're actually very nice venues. They're like big arena type venues. It's not little tiny shoebox places, is what I'm saying. So it seems like, now more than ever, it's good to play those types of places. You could play like a House of Blues, which is like a nice venue. So it's not like, say, in 1994 or 5 when like grunge was all the rage and you're playing just shitty hole in the wall bars.
You're right. Yeah, and I think it's been proven that there's a lot more in the name of the band than necessarily who's in it. And I never thought that would be the case, but that is like with Foreigner. People go see
Yes.
Foreigner, and there's nobody from the original
Yeah.
lineup there.
I'll be honest, it's really everyone has a different opinion on this. And look, everyone, whatever you want to do, you can do what you want. I personally lean more towards I want more original, or at least, like, for instance, we've talked in the past, Queen is my all-time favorite band. I just can't bring myself to go see them with, what's his name, Adam Lambert. Not that I don't like Adam Lambert, but just, to me, it's either Freddie Mercury or I just don't want to see it.
I'm with you. I was
So-
just saying this to my friend the other day, coming out of work, we were talking about, and he's about the same age as us, a little bit older. For us, these bands, it was like following a sports team where you knew who the shortstop was, the left fielder was. You knew every band member. You knew the names. You knew the
Yes.
guys. You studied up. You look at the credits on the back of the album.
You knew all the mascots.
You knew the mascots. So, but it's a different era now. A lot of the younger generation, I suppose, and some of the people our age they just want to go out and remember the good times, listen to the music, and have fun. That's cool. But
And they also talk about now that it's turned into more of like a family thing. Like when we were younger in the 80s going to shows, you really didn't see very many like older people, whereas now it's older people who bring their children to, pretty much enjoy the music. Like Richard Christie talks about that his son, one of his favorite songs is Come On Feel the Noise.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
So,
and Richard Christie has one of the greatest stories I still tell people about when he was talking on Howard Stern, how he loved to drink so much and go to shows. He would wear adult diapers at the concerts.
I got to tell you, Richard Christie always comes through. He tells a great story in this book how he went in the mid-'90s to go see Quiet Riot. He said how he was so happy that, he went to see them. They were great still. And it was great to see like other people his age still hadn't forgotten that music. But he and his friend drank too much. And this was in Florida. They go outside, they pass out in the grass somewhere, and they wake up and they're covered and bitten by fire ants. So he said the moral of this story is never pass out in Florida because you're going to wake up covered in fire ant bites.
And I love, he loves Halloween. Loves Halloween. That's his favorite holiday.
He does. I remember. Yeah.
That's the best. Bang Your Head, Feel the Noise, The Quiet Riot Story. It's out now. You can find it wherever books are sold, and look for it at your local bookstore too. And if it's not there, tell them to get a copy of the book. You can find your nearest store. There's a link at bookedonrock.com to look for your nearest.
I was going to say, and also it's available as paperback, Kindle, hardcover, and also audio with me narrating, if you could believe that.
You were really getting into that, man.
It's all about making a buck. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah, listen, you got a family to feed.
I have bills to pay. I'm also I'm a long-suffering Mets, Jets, and Islanders fan. I need something to give me some kind of pleasure, right?
Did you hear the rumor that because you're a Jets fan, for those who may not know, right? And I'm a Steelers fan.
I have to laugh when someone's like, "Yeah, so you're like a Jets fan."
Yeah, you're one of those people. But I heard a rumor that Aaron Rodgers could go to the Steelers. I'm like, no thanks.
I have heard that.
No.
Well, no, because you know what I was going to say? Because what'll happen is he'll go to the Steelers, and the Steelers will then win the Super Bowl.
You're right.
Because the Jets got rid of Mekhi Becton last year. He goes to the Eagles, and the Eagles win the Super Bowl.
You know what? Following that Jets logic, maybe I do want him on the Steelers then.
Yeah, take him in. Take him
All
in.
right. Oh, my God. All right, Greg, thanks as always. Now, where can people find – you're online on Twitter mostly. You're very active there.
Twitter or X. So what is it called?
Or what is it? X,
Twitter. Yeah, so it's x.com/Greg Prato Writer. And all my books, you go to amazon.com, and you can find this one, of course, which is Bang Your Head, Feel the Noise, The Quiet Riot Story. Hardcover, paperback, Kindle, or audio version. And all my other books. Would you believe I've done over 40 books?
It's up to that now, huh? Wow, that's a high number.
I need to take a nap at some point.
You need to take a nap. And we also give a shout out to the website ultimateguitar.com because
Yes, I do a lot of writing for them, and you always give us a lot of good material to do news articles. I want to thank you, Eric, for that.
I got to put on my website as seen on ultimateguitar.com, Booked on Rock.
We've actually gotten some articles that I don't know if you noticed, like you see the views. A lot of the ones that we've gotten through your interviews that we then do news articles get a lot of views.
That's cool. Yes. No, I can't thank you enough for that, man. That's pretty darn cool. So, Greg, thanks. We'll have you back on again for the next book.
Oh, wait a second. What if I announce quickly what my next book is going to be?
Oh, I love this. All right, go ahead.
In October, my next book is going to be about 90s alternative rock called Alternative for the Masses.
Okay.
And for that one, I interviewed guys from Primus. I interviewed a gentleman from Fugazi, Matt Pinfield, Kennedy. The list goes on, but it's an oral history about 90s alternative rock, the non-grunge bands. So we talk about Smashing Pumpkins, Nine Inch Nails, Faith No More, Blind Melon, who both you and I love. So I will be back for that, please. Have me back.
Yeah, keep me posted. All right, Greg, thanks, man.
Thank you, Eric.
That's it. It's in the books.